Adam Schiff thought he could get away with it for years. He had stood in front of cameras weaving lie after lie, confident that the media would shield him, that the American people would never see the full picture. But today, the illusion was cracking. And Schiff. He was panicking because this time he wasn't just spinning another narrative. He was caught. Picture this. A dimly lit Senate chamber, the air thick with tension. The murmurs of aides and journalists filled the background, their hushed whispers, barely. Masking the unease in the room, Schiff's hands tightened around the podium, knuckles white as the weight of the moment pressed down on him. The camera zoomed in, capturing the beads of sweat forming at his temple, the subtle twitch at the corner of his mouth. He knew this time. There was no escape standing before the Senate. Schiff clung to the podium, his voice rising with practiced urgency. He knew the cameras were rolling, the media was watching, and for once he wasn't in control of the narrative. The moment you say it's okay for them to violate the law to shut down this one agency, you have said it is okay for them to violate the law and shut down anything. If they can do this with us, Ed, they can do this with the Department of Ed. If they can do it with the Department of Ed, they can do it with Medicaid. If they can do it with Medicaid, they can do it with Social Security. It was a fear campaign, plain and simple. Schiff wasn't just defending USAID. He was telling the American people that if Trump's administration was allowed to investigate fraud in one agency soon, everything would be gone. It was an attempt to equate accountability with destruction. It was also a lie, because while Schiff stood there trying to convince America that shutting down USAID would bring catastrophe, something else was happening, something that completely shattered his carefully constructed deception across the globe. A world leader was speaking, and his words didn't match Schiff's narrative at all. That same week, Rwanda's president was asked directly about USAID funding. Cuts, the reporter, expecting outrage or concern, pressed him on the issue. If USAID funding is cut, won't that severely impact Rwanda's economy and stability? President Kagame didn't hesitate. He shook his head and smiled. No, this will be good for us. We will have to become self-reliant. The media didn't want this moment to exist. It wasn't supposed to happen because Schiff had just told America that cutting USAID would cause irreversible harm. He made it sound like the world was on the brink of collapse. And yet here was a leader from a nation that actually received USAID funds saying it was unnecessary if Rwanda could handle losing USAID. Why couldn't America handle cutting it off? Schiff wasn't expecting this, and neither was the press inside CNN. Panic spread, editors scrambled. How could they bury this? Schiff had just bet his entire credibility on a lie. And now the truth was out in the public. They noticed Schiff's problem wasn't just that people doubted him. It was that they were starting to ask real questions, because USAID wasn't just another innocent government program helping people in need. It was a bloated bureaucracy funneling billions overseas, often with little oversight, often benefiting the very people power who claimed it was essential. And when Trump put it on pause, USAID didn't just complain, they violated the freeze. They kept moving money, ignoring the executive order funneling cash to their allies. Even when they were explicitly told to stop, who were they really protecting? Schiff didn't have an answer. And that silence, it was deeing. The cracks in his story were growing, and this was just the beginning. Trump had set the trap, and USAID walked right into it. It wasn't just another executive order. It was a calculated move, a carefully placed landmine disguised as routine government action. The 90-day freeze on foreign aid wasn't about policy shifts or budget realignments. It was about exposing corruption, and Schiffy never saw it coming. Picture this, a high-rise in Washington, D.C. late at night. Inside a USAID conference room. Executives huddled around a long mahogany table, faces pale, voices hushed. The directive had come down: halt all foreign aid spending immediately. But instead of compliance, they plotted resistance. Orders were whispered, memos were exchanged. Keep the money flowing. Find loopholes, work around the freeze. Except there was no way around it. Because the moment they violated that freeze, the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, the very watchdog Trump had empowered, was waiting. It took just 2 weeks for them to identify the worst offender. US said Elon Musk was the first to break the news. He took to X. His message, blunt and surgical. All Dude did was check which federal agencies violated the president's executive order the most. Turns out it was us, so that became our focus. The reaction was instantaneous at US side headquarters. Security officials were caught trying to block Doge investigators from entering the building. They refused access to files. They stalled. They knew what would happen if those documents got out. And that was exactly what gave them away over the weekend. The dog team finally gained access, and what they found: stunning emails, wire transfers, financial records, clear proof that USAID had been actively funneling money despite the freeze. Not just a few overlooked transactions, millions sent to foreign contractors, politically connected organizations, and even companies that didn't exist on paper. It was worse than anyone had imagined. And now, Schiff had a whole new problem inside. CNN talking heads scrambled to get ahead of the scandal. They needed a narrative, and they needed it fast. The first response: dismiss it, call it a right-wing conspiracy, and overreach by Trump's administration. But there was one problem. The receipts were real. The financial records, the leaked internal memos, the attempted cover-up, it was all there. And the American people, they were watching. Social media erupted. Ed just got caught red-handed, and Schiff is pretending it's nothing. They violated a presidential order. This is illegal. If Elon Musk hadn't said anything, would we have ever found out? The cracks in Schiff's story weren't just growing, they were collapsing in real time. And Schiff, he was running out of ways to stop it, because USAID wasn't just ignoring a freeze. They were actively defying the President of the United States, and that was something even Schiff couldn't spin away. This wasn't just about wasteful spending anymore. This was defiance, corruption, a direct challenge to presidential authority. And now it wasn't just the conservative media asking questions. Congress was starting to pay attention. The trap had worked, and Schiff, he was standing right in the middle of it. It started as a trickle, then it became a flood. The revelations about USAID's blatant defiance of Trump's executive order were bad enough, but when the American people saw where the money was actually going, outrage turned into something more dangerous: demand for action. Because this wasn't just about bureaucratic incompetence, it was theft. A family in Flint, Michigan. Turning on the tap, brown water gurgles out thick with cement, undrinkable for years. Politicians had promised they would fix it. They never did. And now those same politicians were standing in front of cameras defending a corrupt aid agency that had been caught red-handed funding projects overseas instead of helping Americans at home. At the center of it all, Schiff. For weeks, he had screamed about how the USAID freeze would devastate global stability, how America had a moral obligation to keep sending money overseas, but now people were seeing the truth. The money wasn't going to starving children or struggling nations. It was going to meaningless pet projects, lavish retreats, and politically connected organizations with zero accountability. One transaction exposed USAID funding a DI-themed musical in Galway, Ireland. Another showed millions sent to an environmental awareness retreat in Switzerland where bureaucrats sat in luxury hotels discussing sustainability. Still another documented funds being funneled into media integrity programs in foreign countries that just so happened to ban conservative voices from their airwaves. The American people were livid. Flint, Michigan needed just $55 million to replace every single lead pipe in the city. Yet in the past 2 years alone, USAID had sent over $400 million to foreign climate activism projects. Money that could have gone to Americans, but didn't. In standing at the podium, Schiff wasn't mad about the corruption. He wasn't mad about us aid violating the law. He wasn't mad that billions of taxpayer dollars had been wasted. He was mad that people found out the real danger here. He told MSNBC in a tense interview, is the weaponization of the government against itself. Weaponization, that was his takeaway. Not the fraud, not the waste. The fact that someone exposed it. Inside ABC News producers were frantically searching for a way to spin the story. The standard playbook wasn't working. They couldn't blame Trump. He had simply put a freeze on foreign aid, and USAID had broken the law to keep spending. They couldn't pretend it wasn't a big deal. The receipts were out in the open, and every major news outlet had reported on it, even begrudgingly, so they pivoted. Most of USAID's funding goes to humanitarian efforts. One host said, "Voice-drained ass." He read from the teleprompter. Another warned that Trump's politically motivated attack on foreign aid is setting a dangerous precedent. But it didn't matter because Americans weren't stupid. They weren't asking whether some USAID money was being used properly. They were asking why billions of their tax dollars were going to foreign nonsense while their own communities were crumbling. Schiff knew it, and now he was drowning. His entire defense of USAID had been based on one thing, that without it the world would collapse, that America had to keep sending billions overseas, no questions asked. But now the American people were asking questions, and